Good afternoon, viewers, and welcome back to the Ray of All Trades channel. Today we're going to be focusing on cleaning up a push mower for spring use. In the beginning of the video, you're going to see that I'm using a scraper and power washer to try to get the underside and the top of the mower cleaned out. You want to try to get all those big chunks of grass and ideally everything you can get cleaned out of there, because anything that stays has the opportunity to rust out the bottom of the mowing deck. So I put it up on a trailer to use it as a deck height so that I could work on the bottom of it without having to lay on the ground. Works pretty well for me. If you don't have a trailer, you can try to compromise and find another type of bench or sawhorses, whatnot. Just if you do, make sure that it's stable so that it doesn't fall off on the ground. What I'm checking here is to make sure that the edge of the blade on both sides of the blade are the same distance away from the edge of the deck. If you have a variance there and you know that it wasn't from a sharpening issue, then most likely the motor shaft is bent from hitting a stump or a rock or something like that. If it is bent, I generally don't try to straighten those motor shafts. They are weak at that point, and there's a pretty good chance that something detrimental could happen. I'm using an electric power washer here, something really small. I think it's a 1650 psi. Trying to make sure that everything's pointed away from me, but I am wearing safety glasses and some protective gear. I could have probably put some gloves on, and I'm sure that a few people will point that out to me. But all I'm trying to do is get rid of the dirt and grass clumps that have been left on there. Again, just trying to make sure that it lasts as long as possible. I like to take off the chute or clippings guide, whatever you want to call it, just to make sure that I can get everything cleaned out from underneath there, make sure that the bolts are in decent shape and they're not rusted completely through. It also helps me get everything clean, and when I'm changing oil, it doesn't hold the motor up off the ground uneven. So friends, I'm probably going to get a lot of comments and complaints on this one, but this is one of the best ways I've found for changing the engine oil. So the plug on the bottom of the motor a lot of times is seized on there, usually from lack of maintenance, things like that. But if you tilt the motor and always make sure that the air filter and carburetor are on the top side, so they're never on the bottom side. If you tilt the motor over and put a drain pan underneath where the oil dipstick is, most of the oil will drain out. Again, I said most. It's not going to catch all of it. And it's a non-filtered system for most of these, or all of them that I've ever seen. But when you generally get 80% of the oil out of there, you're only topping off about 20%. And if you're religious about taking care of it, you're not going to see a problem. And the motors are lightweight enough that you can flip these over pretty easily and look at the shape of the crankcase and make sure you get majority of it out. So you'll be pulling it out emptying it out that exact same place that you would be putting the oil in. But again, make sure that the carburetor is always facing up when you do this. Generally, the funnels that are made for transmissions that are sold at parts stores have a small enough opening at the bottom to fit into the dipstick hole on a lot of those push mowers that require the thread-in style dipsticks, as opposed to the ones that have the larger cap up top. If you notice, I happen to put the mower on the ground because I live on a hill and I needed to make sure I got an accurate reading. Too little of oil, obviously, it'll it'll have oil starvation and it'll destroy bearings, things like that. And too much oil is also just as detrimental because it could bend valves or push the oil up out of the crankcase and then make it run rough. It's supposed to say step 4, change the air filter, and I was trying to give you the part number of the Briggs & Stratton air filter I found. Don't remember what it was. It's kind of an old video. But when you take the cover off and pull the filter out, use a rag. Try to get all that stuff cleaned out of there. Otherwise, the loose particles that are left and the dirt that's left will find its way into the intake. Again, you're just trying to keep this thing clean so that it'll last a lot longer. Mowers are coming up in price, and you want to make these things last as long as you possibly can. Obviously, they'll run better, use less fuel if they have better maintenance on them. One of the annual maintenance items is changing out your spark plug. It's amazing how plug will just deteriorate over the course of 1 year, and that should be an annual maintenance item. Like I said, I try to use name brand spark plugs, Briggs & Stratton, NGK, AC Delco, things like that. Important to pull off your boot, pull out the plug, and read that plug. A good running engine, just like in the video shows here, it would be like a light brown color. If you're seeing a lot of oil and soot deposits, things of that nature on that plug, it tells you that it's either running rich or too much oil. It's been overfilled with oil, air filters plugged, running too hot, running too lean, things like that. A lot of resources on the internet as far as how to read spark plugs. Going to clean out the clipping guide attachment, or the chute, a lot of people call it. Just make sure everything's clean. Make sure that you're not compressing any more grass and stuff like that in there. When you're putting it on there, make sure that the nut and bolt are in decent condition and that they're going to seal back up properly. You may want to use a little bit of blue Loctite, things like that, just to keep them from vibrating loose. There obviously is a lot of vibration on this engine as it's spinning. And I think it spins about 3,200 RPMs or 3,000 RPMs for most of those. Again, I just go back to the internet and it'll tell you what, if you look up the make and model of the motor, it'll tell you what the ideal RPMs are. I like to pull the wheels off the mower each year, anytime I possibly can. Get everything cleaned out from the axle, whether it be a 2-piece or a 1-piece. You just want to get all the old grease and dirt that's accumulated over the course of a cutting season out of there so that the wheel spins free. And I like to put a little bit of grease to coat that axle when I put it back together, just to make sure that even though it's going to attract a little bit of dirt over the course of a season, it has some lubrication and it won't wear out that plastic quite as fast. It also seems to take up some of the vibration that you see when you spin a wheel. Just for speeding up the video, you see me taking the wheels off and putting it back on. But what I did was pulled them off, and again, I cleaned out the axles, greased each one independently, put them back on, make sure that everything was tight. Once it's all tight, with that 3/8 inch impact gun that I've got turned down quite a bit, it basically is only putting it on about 25 foot-pounds of torque. And spin the wheel freely at the end just to make sure that everything's not bound up and that there's not a lot of vibration going to cause any kind of excess wear. This next step is critical. You want to make sure that the condition of the blade is that of basically what you had when you bought it brand new. You're looking for the straightness of the blade, because a bent blade or a significantly nicked blade would cause a vibration which would wear out the bearings and seals prematurely. And you're also looking for the sharpness of the blade to be similar to that of when you bought the blade originally. Here I am using a flap wheel grinder disc to put the edge back on the blade similar to the factory edge, and you'll see that I keep checking for temperature of the grinding to make sure that the metal's not getting overheated, and I'm also verifying to see if my angle is holding true and how long it takes for me to get most of the edge back. You reach a point where some of the nicks are so drastic into the blade that it would take several more passes of sharpening that blade for it to be a functional blade, and you kind of have to find that happy medium of you've got it sharp enough, and it's anything more would cause you to have to go to the store to buy a new one. So here I am checking the blade for balance. You want to see if you pulled too much material off of one side or the other. So you find a object that you can put in the middle of the blade. I was using a screwdriver that I had fastened in the vise and saw that it wasn't quite balanced. So one side was hanging more than the other. So you try to just take off a little bit more material until the blade seems to hang balanced or hang level. You see, it takes a few tries to get it to where it won't continue to spin on its own. Um, it's tough to explain, but when you have a center point on there and the blade is pretty much balanced, it will stay in whatever position you put it in without trying to spin on its own. So when it's severely imbalanced, it'll not want to stay, and it'll want to move more than a half of an inch, something like that. So you try to do the best you can, and the better you get it, the smoother the motor will run. Time to put that freshly sharpened blade back on. You want to make sure you know which side is up, and if you're in doubt, you can have somebody gently pull on the cord just for a revolution or so you can see which direction it's supposed to go, and make sure that the cutting edges are facing the right direction. Here I am checking the fastening bolt, just to make sure there's no burrs on the threads, nothing that would stop it from going back in. And on a used blade, you can usually see where the bolt came out, which one has the washer on it. So I try to put it in by hand as much as possible to make sure it drops into the grooves. And I use that same 3/8 impact. This time I've got it turned up to about 40 foot-pounds of torque to spin it back on. Make sure everything's fastened the way it's supposed to. Give it a turn, make sure that everything is still in alignment.